Let's make him welcome right now, the one and only Stringbean. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I will take you into a story that very few have dared to repeat, let alone investigate. It is the kind of tale whispered only backstage, spoken in low tones, often followed by a deep silence. You may know him as the lovable banjo player with pants hiked up to his chest and a heart as wide as Tennessee. Stringbean, David Aikman, was one of country music's most familiar faces, a comic genius, a banjo master, a man you thought could never carry hatred in his soul. But after his tragic murder in 1973, inside his own cabin, alongside his beloved wife, the police made a startling discovery. Hidden among the couple's belongings was a leather-bound notebook, dusty with time, yet clearly cherished. Inside that notebook was a single page, titled, "5 I'll Never Forget for All the Wrong Reasons." There were no full names, only cryptic initials, and each one accompanied by a short, biting phrase that revealed more emotion than Stringbean ever shared in public. Tonight, dear audience, we are going to uncover the mystery of that list. And the question still haunting the Grand Ole Opry stage, who were the 5 musicians Stringbean could never forgive, and what did they do to leave such a scar? Before we examine the 5 cryptic entries that haunted that notebook page, we must face a difficult truth, that even the kindest souls bleed quietly. And Stringbean, ladies and gentlemen, bled in silence for years. The list was short, just 5 lines, but each one carried a bitterness so raw, so personal, it didn't belong to a man like Stringbean, or so we thought. The first name was marked only as R.M., thief of melody, thief of soul. Many in the Opry circle speculated this referred to a fellow banjo picker from the early 50s, a man who, according to Stringbean's close friends, once visited him in the dead of night, begging for help to revive a failing career. Stringbean played him a new tune he'd been working on. A month later, that very same melody appeared on the radio, registered under the other man's name. Stringbean never spoke of it publicly, but those who knew him said his playing changed after that. It lost something pure. The second name, L.W., he laughed at what made me whole. This one cut deeper. Rumors point toward a rising star in the Nashville scene who, in a televised interview, ridiculed the old-fashioned, clownish look of older Opry performers. No names were used, but he described a fella still dressing like the Dust Bowl hit yesterday, which many took as a cruel jab at Stringbean. What the audience didn't know was those clothes were not an act. They were a memory, a scar, a statement. And for Stringbean, that laughter wasn't just mockery, it was dismissal of everything he stood for. Third, B.C. He owed me more than money. He owed me his word. This one was even darker. A backstage tale, never confirmed, told of a gambling debt gone wrong. Stringbean, known for his generosity, had once covered the expenses of a struggling musician on tour. The amount wasn't public, but it was said to be substantial. When asked about repayment, the man simply laughed and said, You're rich. What's it to you?" That one sentence, friends said, broke Stringbean's trust. Not for the money, but for the betrayal of friendship. The fourth entry chilled even those who claimed to be closest to him. Th. She made Estelle cry for 3 weeks. Whoever this was, it wasn't just personal, it was intimate. Estelle, his wife of over 30 years, was known for her kindness and quiet grace. For something or someone to have wounded her so deeply was no small matter. It was whispered among Opry wives that a woman in the industry had once tried to undermine Estelle's place at Stringbean's side, sowing seeds of doubt, perhaps even lies. The full truth remains locked away with the couple's ashes, but the pain was real enough to earn a line in that final secret list. And then, the fifth, the most cryptic of all. DJ. He twisted the truth until I no longer recognized myself. Many believe this referred not to a single person, but to a radio disc jockey who had once been a close ally, promoting Stringbean's early records. Later, the same voice on the airwaves would push a new sound, glitzier, louder, more commercial, and mock what he once championed. Stringbean, already watching the music he loved fade from public favor, now heard his own name ridiculed between pop country segments. To him, it wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure. Ladies and gentlemen, this was not a man seeking vengeance. This was a man trying to make sense of heartbreak. He never published these names. He never confronted them in public, but he wrote them down and kept them close, like wounds that never closed, only scabbed over with silence. Ladies and gentlemen, what kind of pain compels a man like Stringbean, a man so gentle, so quiet, so beloved, to write down the names of those who wronged him, but never once speak of them aloud? To find the answer, we must listen not just to what he left behind, but to what he chose never to say. Years before his tragic death, something in Stringbean had begun to change. Those closest to him noticed a subtle shift, less laughter between acts, more quiet moments in the dressing room, and a growing distance between himself and the newer performers at the Opry. One veteran said he still smiled, but there was a sadness underneath, like he saw something the rest of us didn't. Behind the scenes, the industry was shifting. The rise of the Nashville sound was pushing aside the old-time pickers. Fiddle and banjo were being replaced by lush strings, background vocals, rhinestones, and marketing. Many of Stringbean's friends adapted. He didn't. He couldn't. And for that, he was left behind. Then came the interviews, subtle jabs in country music magazines. One young starlet referred to Stringbean and his peers as museum pieces. Another, when asked if she'd ever work with the Hee Haw cast, scoffed at, "I'm not into parody country." Those were knives dressed as jokes, and they pierced deeper than anyone realized. A fellow Opry performer recalled a night in 1972. Stringbean had finished his set, packed his banjo, and stood silently at the side of the stage as a newer act strutted across with flashing lights and electric guitars. He turned and whispered, "I don't know if this stage knows who it is anymore." But he never lashed out publicly. Instead, he carried those feelings with grace until they found their way on that list. And then came the silence. By the final year of his life, Stringbean had all but withdrawn from the industry's social circle. He and Estelle kept to themselves. They gardened. They went fishing. They saved cash in the walls of their cabin, terrified of banks and systems. A few close friends were still welcomed, but even they said he had become a quieter version of himself. In September 1973, during a late-night conversation with Grandpa Jones, Stringbean reportedly said, "Some folks mistake kindness for weakness. They only figure it out when it's too late." It was the closest he ever came to revealing the weight he carried. Weeks later, he and Estelle were murdered inside their own home after returning from a performance at the Opry. The killers, two men looking for the rumored cash, left behind more than just broken bodies. They left behind a haunting silence and that leather-bound notebook on the shelf. Inside, scrawled in tight, slanted handwriting, were pages of old songs, banjo tunings, phone numbers, and one list. 5 lines, 5 betrayals. Grandfather Jones would later say it was like finding the only part of Stringbean's heart he never let anyone see. And perhaps, ladies and gentlemen, it was a secret confessional, not to shame, not to accuse, but to remember, to record, not revenge. And yet, in that act, he left behind a mystery so raw it still echoes today. Who those people were, what they did, and why a man who never raised his voice found himself haunted enough to write it all down. Ladies and gentlemen, it would be easy to reduce Stringbean's list to bitterness, to imagine a man who grew old and angry, writing down names out of spite. But those who knew him best paint a different picture, one of a man not filled with hate, but with sorrow. After his death, as friends and family sifted through the fragments of his life, they found something else, tucked between pages of banjo tablature and faded Polaroids, a loose sheet of notebook paper, yellowed with time. No names, no accusations, just one sentence underlined twice. If I speak it, it lives. If I write it, it leaves. To some, it was a clue, a personal philosophy. Perhaps writing the names wasn't a declaration of war, but a ritual of release, his way of letting go. And yet, he kept the list. He didn't burn it. He didn't throw it away. So why? Maybe because Stringbean was not just a performer, he was a historian of the heart. Someone who believed that even the painful parts of life deserved to be remembered, that hurt, too, is part of the truth. His widow, Estelle, who perished alongside him that same night, had once told a neighbor over coffee, "Bean doesn't forget anything, but he forgives in his own time."
And maybe he did forgive them. Maybe that list was the beginning of that process, or maybe it was all he could do. In the end, the page remained in that cabin, not mailed, not published, not even whispered, just quietly waiting, as if Stringbean knew someone someday would find it, not to expose the names, but to understand the weight of carrying them. And perhaps that's the most heartbreaking part of all. Because despite the smiles, the jokes, the beloved banjo notes that made us laugh and tap our feet, he was human. And being human means we all carry names we'll never forget, for all the wrong reasons. So the next time you hear Stringbean's music, dear audience, remember the man behind the laughter, a man who was wounded, a man who chose silence, a man who in the end still gave everything he had to his audience and left his pain on the page. Ladies and gentlemen, what would you do if your heart had been broken not by strangers, but by the very people who once stood beside you under the same spotlight? Would you shout their names from the rooftops? Would you bury the pain in silence? Or would you, like Stringbean, simply write it down and tuck it away, hoping the words would carry the weight instead of your soul?
We often celebrate the joy artists bring us, the melodies that lift us, the laughter that heals us, but we rarely ask what it cost them, what they swallowed behind the curtain, what they carried home in the dark. For Stringbean, that cost was quiet, and it was heavy. He gave us music, he gave us character, and yet, somewhere along the line, something was taken from him and never returned. Perhaps we'll never know who those 5 names truly belong to. Perhaps we shouldn't. But the list remains, a symbol, a whisper, a soft cry from a gentle man who asked for so little and remembered so much. Dear viewers, I ask you this: is silence strength or surrender? Is writing it down a way of healing or a wound that never closed? In the end, we don't get to choose how people carry their pain, but we can choose to see them more fully. So the next time you smile at the sound of a banjo or laugh at a hee-haw skit, take a moment and remember that even the kindest faces may be hiding the heaviest truths. Ladies and gentlemen, this was Stringbean's truth, and now it is ours to carry too.